In July this year, 2025, 6 people lost their lives in separate crashes in WA, all within a 48-hour period. In 2024, there were 188 fatalities on WA roads, which was recorded as the worst year in nearly a decade, with 30 more deaths than the previous year. For some years now, WA has had one of the worst road fatality rates of any state in Australia. On average, over the 2020 to 2024 period, 3 people were killed every week due to road trauma. Welcome to RAC's Horizons podcast. I'm Mike Bartlett. To help us unpack what's been happening on WA roads, we're speaking today with Professor Teresa Senserrick, Director of the Western Australian Centre for Road Safety Research at UWA, and Matthew Tepi Mclaughlin, who's the Adjunct Research Fellow in the School of Human Sciences at the University of Western Australia. The first 7 months of 2025 have been the worst for road fatalities in WA for more than a decade, and has the state tracking towards the highest annual figure in nearly 20 years. Usually we see regional fatalities higher than metro, but so far, metro fatalities are higher than we would expect. Compared to the 2020 to 2024 average, regional fatalities to the beginning of August 2025 are 6% higher than average, while metro fatalities are a staggering 63% higher. So before we dig into the reasons behind these figures, it'd be good to get a clear picture of where WA sits right now, both in terms of its own history and the rest of the country. Do you think this last year and a half is just an outlier, or is it part of a pattern?
I'd say that Western Australia, the number's way too high, whatever it is. So road tragedy, but I think we've got to start there with this conversation that every road death's an absolute tragedy, and they're all preventable. Okay, so whether it's going up or down, 0 is the number we want to get to, and it's possible. There are cities around the world, hundreds of cities around the world that have achieved 0 deaths.
Right.
So I think that's a good place to start before we start talking about whether things are going up or down.
Okay, all right. I would love to come back and talk about those cities that are getting it right. But Teresa, what's your feeling about this? Is this a trend?
Yeah, we usually wait for at least 3 years of data to know if it's a statistical blip or not.
Okay.
But given that the rest of the country is seeing similar sorts of patterns, we do think that it's turning around and it's higher than it should be.
Okay, so Australia's national road fatality figure has been steadily increasing for the past few years. So you feel that WA is now just becoming part of that trend? It's
not necessarily, because as you mentioned, it's quite unusual for the uptick to be in the metro area rather than in the more regional areas.
So there might be specific WA reasons for this shocking figure.
We certainly want to unpack that.
We have gone from back in the 1980s of having one of the lowest road fatality rates in Australia. We're now one of the highest. What's happened? What are some of the factors that has seen this backsliding?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that we've got in a Western Australian context that perhaps doesn't apply as much in the other states, but is certainly there, is the sprawl that we've got. So we all take the most convenient forms of transport. That's life. We all need to get to the places we need to get to, drop the kids off, do what we need to do. That's what we're creatures that want the convenient option. But when the convenient option is a 35 kilometre drive, there and back, that's 70 kilometres a day of driving.
Right.
And perhaps in the 1980s, that same work trip or that same set of journeys in the day, that was less. We're now driving more than we ever did. So the first thing to note is that we're driving more. We have more dependency on our cars. We're forced into our cars more because of the way we've designed Perth and Western Australia.
Okay, so we're seeing WA's growing population. I think we're all feeling the pressure in the housing market, for example, of that growing population. But it is also putting more pressure on our road networks. People are spending longer in their cars. Perhaps the fatigue is more of an issue. Teresa?
I would also say our roads are full.
Okay.
We're really at capacity. So you'll notice if there's, a crash or a breakdown in one part of the network, pretty much across Perth we're at a standstill and we're doubling our trip times to work. We do need to think about that redesign, having more people out of cars, into public transport, into active travel. We know that a lot of people's trips to work or even children going to school are really short distances. but we've just become accustomed to chaining the trips, dropping the kids and going to work or shopping or other parts of life when, being more active has so many health benefits and really helps with the road toll as well.
I mean, Tepi was saying that obviously we're spending longer in the car, we're driving more, but Teresa, you're saying that we're also making more journeys that are unnecessary, shorter journeys. I mean, why is that?
I can touch on that one. I think
yeah.
Those shorter journeys, so just to give everybody a number to play with there, so we have 4.2 million journeys in Perth a day. And of those, 2.8 million are less than 5 kilometres. So we could walk or cycle those in 15 minutes or less if we had access to the safe streets that were easy to cross, that had shade, that were really designed for people and not for cars first.
Right.
That doesn't mean that cars aren't allowed on them. It just means that they've got a footpath, for example, and they've got some trees. And so that's one way that road safety can deal with this. We can actually redesign the streets. But fundamentally, I think this is what Teresa and I are both saying, is you can treat the roads and make them better. Mm-hmm. We've actually got to reduce the total amount of driving if we want to achieve that 0 road deaths.
All right, so there's too many cars on the road, and the roads just aren't safe enough to be making journeys on foot, essentially, or by bike or...
Well, I walk to school and then rode to school, and I think now to where I grew up even, the roads are now busier, the streets have been widened, the trees have been removed, and do we really want to live on streets that are highways just to manage more cars, or do we want to still have our neighbourhoods with our trees where we used to play cricket and football on the street, for example? Mm-hmm. That's becoming harder and harder, and personal safety becomes an issue as well. And I think parents are less willing for their children to walk to school when they're going near these types of road environments.
I feel that's very true. I know with my kids, I'm so much... more reluctant to let them have the freedom that I had. I rode absolutely everywhere, but we've got our youngest now has one of those sort of smartwatches, so we can keep in touch with her. But even then, I feel very anxious at the thought of her going anywhere near any kind of road.
And we perhaps sound a bit doomsday with this, as if it's inevitable. Yeah. And people might be thinking, well, how are you going to fix that? Like, the streets are the streets. Like, you can't go around and change absolutely every street. And that's correct. Like, overnight, we can't change every street, but there are some things we can do to change the amount of driving that people need to do, and also to improve the safety of the existing streets that we've got.
Let's just touch on that quickly. What are some of the things what are some steps we could take to make the streets feel safer?
I think it's like what Teresa was saying. We all want to live on those streets that are really easy to cross and what have you, and that have got footpaths and connected to the shops, so that it's not a 10-kilometre drive to the shops. It's actually only around the corner. And what can we do to the streets to make that happen? Well, we can change our design guides to ensure that all new complexes, all new housing estates that are being built aren't on the urban fringes, disconnected from all the infrastructure, and are infill within the city, connected to that existing infrastructure, connected to existing footpaths, places to go, schools. And it means that people have access. People have access then to walk, to cycle, to take public transport, which they might not have. We're the longest city in the world.
Yes.
I don't know if you've probably seen that. We're 170 kilometres now. And if we keep going like that, it costs taxpayers more and more money to provide services north and south. And it's the taxpayers that are subsidising this building north and south.
Okay.
All three of us here, people listening online, we're subsidising this. So it's lower cost to build infill, but we have to start incentivising housing developers to build there.
It's interesting, though, because I think when people hear about infill, they assume it's going to make the traffic worse, that it's going to actually make the streets less safe, there's going to be more people driving. But that's not the case, you think?
It's not the case because people have got access to it starts to provide the critical mass of people that you need to offer services on public transport.
Right.
So people will always take the most convenient option. People will drive when that's the most convenient option, and they'll take public transport when it's quicker and easier.
Yeah.
This isn't an ideological thing of go and walk because it's good for you or all of that sort of stuff. This is take the most convenient option. And unfortunately, the most convenient option at the moment is to drive most journeys.
As a psychologist, one of the simplest answers in behaviour change is make it easy.
Right.
And I think that's what Tepi is alluding to. And so part of that is the design is also narrowing the road where the motor vehicles go and widening the edges and having them more accessible, feeling more safe, shifting journeys to maybe pairing with semi-rideable travel up to public transport or around your local environment. With the grid design of Perth City, very simple to try and think about being able to get short distances, but of course we have the legacy of the roads that already exist and the designs that exist. So it's not overnight, but certainly calming traffic, bringing down speeds so that we can have smoother journeys. So we're not getting held up in the rear-end crashes and breakdowns that really just clog the roads and we're really struggling with right now. And furthering out, having services available around so not everyone's doing the same sort of journey in the same direction. The new future visions of how we get around as vehicles become more autonomous and connected, we can have smaller vehicles and they can chain together and make virtual trains. So people might still have their own way to get around when they need to, but will be designed on a grid so that they can smoothly travel and link. All the erratic speeds, the different vehicle sizes and shapes and the mix of vehicles together is a real problem at the moment. So if we can look towards that future, part of that is being more active and thinking about last mile travel and being connected close to public transport hubs, being able to avoid being in that gridlock because we're taking different pathways to get to where we need to.
I mean, on a plus point here, we're talking less congestion, we're talking easier ways to get to work. We know from Wales they've introduced a default 20 miles an hour speed limit, which is the equivalent of 30 kilometres an hour on their local streets. We could apply it across the entire state of Western Australia on our local streets, that their default is 30, where the current default is 50. It's too high. We're seeing an increase in metro deaths. We need to bring it down. It makes no difference to journey times. Very, very minimal, because these streets aren't the ones we drive a lot on. These are the ones that connect us to our house or to, the side streets. These are easy wins. It just takes strong, bold political action.
They also don't even have speed signs. So these are the neighbourhood streets where a default, as it's called, applies, which is that 50 kilometres if you don't see a sign. So it doesn't even cost very much there's some area-wide signs that say the maximum in built-up areas is 50. So a few of those need to get changed, but otherwise it's a very low-cost way to have an immediate effect on those statistics in the metro areas.
Minor infrastructure. Well, it'd be good to come back to some of that towards the end and where people are getting it right around the world. But let's sort of dig into the numbers a bit more. I mean, we've talked about how making the streets safer, really, we're talking about changing human behaviour. And while the numbers can tell us a lot about what's happening, at the heart of every crash, of course, is a human who's made perhaps a bad decision. What are some of the behaviours and habits that are putting us at risk, do you think? What driver behaviours are contributing most to the rate of people being killed or seriously injured on WA roads?
The single largest behaviour is speeding,
right,
or going too fast for the conditions. So again, speed limits are there for when conditions are ideal, but there are times when that's too fast. And I think we've done a really bad job, actually, when we keep asking the community to drive to the conditions. When I did a search recently, it seems to be if the weather's bad or there's heavy traffic. In fact, so many features of the roads are there to try and guide people to what is a safe speed. And yet we did some research recently where we randomly showed a 1-star, 3-star or 5-star rated road scene and asked people what did they think the speed was on that road, as well as their preferred speed. And it's very clear that people have no idea. from just looking at the environment. So I think we're quick to ask people to drive to conditions, but we haven't really given them that more nuanced detail of what we mean by that and what sort of features make a road environment more risky.
Right. I sometimes think that those road features that are traffic calming measures or are designed to signal that people should be driving more slowly are seen as challenges by some drivers to, well, I'm going to keep driving fast, but watch me zigzag through this. They've put in some
chicanes.
Chicanes and some speed bumps on the road near us, and of course the larger cars just love sailing straight over the top of them. Yeah.
I mean, generally speaking, we know they work, though.
Yeah.
And I think that's important to say. Another crucial thing for me here is when we put it back onto the drivers and say, you need to do better, which is what we kind of tend to do in society. You need to do better. Why are you speeding? Why are you doing this, that, the other? We're ignoring that this is policy-driven. The countries that have achieved zero deaths have brought into place policies that reduce urban sprawl, that make it convenient to take public transport and make it easy to leave the car at home for short journeys. Mm-hmm. And look, that's where everybody wants to live. These are the types of places that are the most expensive to buy in Western Australia.
Sure.
Places like Subiaco, where people want to live, are connected, are easy to walk around and safe.
And have those 30k zones on Rockaby Road.
And have the traffic calming and have road narrowing. So all the things we've talked about so far come together in some existing places in Western Australia. So we've got to work on that. We've got, and it's a political choice as to where we build our housing. It's driven by subsidies. So, for example, in Western Australia, we provide $300 million a year in subsidies to road building. Okay, so the income that we bring in from registration of cars, from vehicle licensing, all of the government revenue that we get from parking levies, all of that, less than $300 million less than what we spend on roads. At an Australia level, it's a whopping $8 billion of subsidies for road building. So this is about following the money, and this is about following the policies and being bold.
I think it's also important that while I mentioned speeding is the single largest, when you look at data, and this has been done recently in South Australia, in other parts of the country, but was done some time ago in WA, finding exactly the same result, about 70% of people involved in the crash data were not speeding, drinking, taking drugs, distracted as far as we know. All that, and they were wearing their seatbelts. So most people are out there trying to do the right thing, but they can get caught up in crashes with other people. So it's.
So I think what this translates into is we can't just keep piling money into media campaigns telling people not to speed or not to drink and drive. These are base level campaigns that we'll always do, but we can't expect them to work to actually fix this problem, to bring to zero. In fact, we're doing them right now. Okay, the campaigns exist. They're out there. They're on our cinema screens. They're in our social media feeds, and we know that. They're here to remind us of speed's a bad thing. That's good, but we actually have to take bolder action and reduce our speed limits and make it road diets and narrow the streets so that it's less encouraging to speed. We have to do those things. Otherwise, we will continue to see our roads being the number one killer of children. And we will continue to see road deaths increase.
When we talk about speeding, people often assume that's doing 120 in a 50 zone, but that's not always the case when it comes to accidents. There's what we call low-level speeding. I mean, could we talk a bit about that, about the prevalence and the impact of low-level speeding?
We recently did a representative survey, and the number one factor when people said they were more likely to speed was when they were to keep up with the traffic.
Right.
We have a culture that is very different on the road than you might expect anywhere else. When you travel at the speed limit, you have people that come up behind you, trying to push you ahead, tooting at you. But when you are sitting at the speed limit where you're supposed to be, there is still that what I call bullying behaviour. And I am sure that bullying type of behaviour that happens in vehicles is not, those people are not doing that face-to-face with people in their workplace. There's something about the road that really brings out this nature of people that I also think of when I started driving, and now, okay, the next top thing is when you're running late. But I feel like lives are so busy now that everyone's always wanting to get there as quickly as they can. That's part of that convenience factor that Tepi mentions.
Well, I'm a new dad, and I definitely get that, having to get from place to place with new Bob and get around. And often there is no choice for me to take a different way to get there. I have to drive and I have to sit in congestion. And that's highly frustrating. And I know that fixing it won't be just putting more roads in place, because they'll just get filled up straight away with more cars. They're already there. So what we've got to do is think about, how do we provide access to the other stuff?
Yeah.
It's brilliant for drivers when other people are not in the car. You've got the space, right? Yeah. So this is a win-win for everybody on our roads.
Teresa, you did touch on something there, though. And Tepi, I completely understand the sense that we are heavily scheduled. Everything is urgent, particularly when you've got young children. I think the most anxious, frustrating times I've had on the road have been trying to get to childcare in time to pick up the kids and, or drop them off and then get to work. But Teresa, you touched on something that is Perth specific. I was talking to someone who, and I know you're from Melbourne, and I was talking to someone from Melbourne the other day who was complaining about Perth drivers, and I'm sure we've all heard that at some point. WA does get a bad rap from other states. Is there a cultural element about the way that people in WA drive, and perhaps the bullying behaviour is part of that? Is there a WA culture of driving that is different to other states?
I really have to say, now, I haven't lived in Melbourne for over 20 years now, but I'm always surprised when people tell me that Perth is the worst.
Oh,
okay,
yeah.
So I have lived in Melbourne, I've lived in Sydney, I've lived in the US when I was doing my postdoc. I think this is part of human nature, and the bigger the population, the more you get, the more you need people to share the road and be more courteous. But there's something about human nature that tends to get more aggressive this way. I don't think it is specific to Perth, but it is there, and I particularly feel it in work zones. And, again, we need to humanise this. These are people who might have families to go home to and are just doing their job, working on the road or helping construct, unfortunately, usually a wider road lane, but, sometimes bike lanes and other things. And these people are human too, but people don't like the idea of going down to 40. And the only survivable speed for someone being impacted by a car, that is a pedestrian or a cyclist, and even a motorcyclist for that matter, is 30 kilometres an hour.
That's right, 30.
And so this is where we're saying speeds need to go down. At 50, even if you account that usually there's some early warning and you might be able to brake and bring that speed down, it's not going to be anywhere near 30. So, even if we can get to that 40 being common, as in school zones, that's where, particularly for a child, so at both ends of the spectrum, the youngest children and the oldest pedestrians are the most vulnerable to injury. We have to get those speeds down to 30. So I don't think anyone would really choose to sacrifice children to be able to drive 10 k's faster. And the other fallacy about speeding in metro areas, there's been really good follow-up studies with the people who speed and the people who don't. And, the average they save is 26 seconds a day, or maybe 2 minutes a week if they go with a speeding type of driving behaviour. Because, again, roads are congested and they're busy. We just cannot keep these speeds that we've lived with all this time and expect that, I don't think that that's anyone wants that trade-off. As Tepi said, we need to get that down to zero.
I've lived on streets that are 30 kilometres an hour and back in the UK, and you just don't even notice it when it goes down to 30. You just drive it, and when you're out on foot on those streets, you notice it's a lot quieter. You notice that the street's easier to cross. I've got She's 96. Oh, sorry if you're listening, Grandma, and that's wrong. I think she's 96. And crossing the street with her is easy because cars will slow right down and see us crossing on these quiet streets. But when it was, because I remember the change, when it was 30 miles an hour, which is the equivalent of 50 kilometres an hour, it was too fast to do that. She was in her late 80s at that point with similar mobility issues, and it was too hard. So they introduced a few speed humps and they brought the speed limit down. Brilliant. Fantastic. It allowed me to go and see my grandma, get her out the house. She goes over to see her neighbours now. This is what we're talking about. And one question, can I ask a question?
Yes.
Is that all right?
Yes.
Oh, awesome. This is a sort of philosophical question, but actually is becoming more real these days with technology. Should we be allowed to speed? So if we ask that question about e-scooters, should you be allowed to speed on the e-scooters, which is a very timely issue at the moment? They were capped at 25 kilometres an hour in the city. So the answer was no, you couldn't speed on those share scooters. Okay? So when we say with cars, they go up to 200 kilometres an hour, some even higher. And you can drive that on a local street. So should we be allowed to speed?
So you're foreseeing a future in which our cars will just cut off at the speed limit.
Well, that technology exists.
They can already read the street signs.
That technology exists. It's called Intelligent Speed Assist. It's fantastic. It's coming in. It will take bold political action to adopt it in new cars. But it means no more speeding fines. It will mean inevitably less crashes.
And less of that bullying behaviour that Teresa was
less bullying behaviour. Less kids dying on our streets. So there's a lot of positives to it. The one negative is it takes away our freedom. Oh, give it a rest. It's nonsense. So I've probably answered my own question there, but that's
it was a rhetorical question. But Tepi, do you feel that there is a particular WA culture of driving? And I feel Teresa touched on this. I feel at heart we're still not used to having so many people on the road. That, I remember when I lived here 20 years ago and it was unusual that there'd be someone in front of you. And now I get this feeling here that there's still this sense of, why is there someone else on this road? Why is there someone, where's this traffic come from? I mean, do you feel that there is a particular WA frustration with traffic, which of course, we are the traffic?
Well, I go back to, we just want it to be convenient. We want to get to places. And when it's not because the roads are congested, and when it's not because things are so far away because we live 55 minutes away from the CBD because there's no housing that's affordable that's closer, then that is the culture. But the culture's not driven by West Aussies being bad or, some hypothetical thing that there's something different in the water here or something. It's driven by the policies that enable this. The housing thing, I know I've touched on this a couple of times, but it's really important that we get the housing right for road safety. Where we put our housing impacts road safety. If we put it on the urban fringe, people have to drive further. Driving further leads to more crashes, leads to more deaths. If we can bring the city in and people have access to the things they need, things they want to go to, they need to drive less kilometres, less people will die on the roads. And ultimately, we will be able to provide more services to get them out of the cars completely if they so want to.
I'll give you one concession on Perth driving culture.
Go on, then.
Because I heard it a lot from I'm sure the first week that I was here, that Perth drivers don't know how to merge.
That's the one that comes up all the time, isn't it?
Merging comes all the time.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's about knowing how to merge, but I also feel that it's the bullying sort of, it's not bullying in that case, but people just get a sense of, this is my space on the road, and they don't like to let people in. And I work a lot with young people and new drivers, and when I say to them, and this happens when I do it myself, that if you look at the number of the cars that want to cut in or cut out or merge in, count the number of cars that come in and also count the number of cars that jump out. And so often on every trip it was zero. I think these are fractions of seconds. If you look in the distance, if you're on 100 or 110 motorway and you want to speed up and not have that gap, count that distance. It's really 2 seconds. So what is the harm? If someone's jumping in and then other people are jumping out, you're actually not saving any time, and how much calmer and less stressful is it to drive without caring about these things. So we as drivers, we can't control other people, but we can control how we feel and what we do. And if we can relax and know that this is really not impacting us, it feels like it at the time. And
it feels like competition sometimes.
It does.
You are literally
It
in a
does.
race.
Driving is inherently social.
Yeah.
We don't teach people that driving is social. All the way that we educate people, that we license people, it's always as individuals. And we teach new drivers, this is what you do as a driver when there is a passenger or there's a pedestrian, and those same people are also other people's passengers and pedestrians. We don't think very collectively when we think about driving, but it's inherent. It is just social, and that social pressure means that everyone is responsible when people are speeding. We like to look at young people, and we know, yes, as an age group, there might be a higher propensity to self-report speeding compared to other age groups. But again, they're wanting to fit in with the traffic and not stand out. For the young people listening to the podcast, unfortunately, as the newest drivers on the road, that means you don't have the same sort of instincts yet that just take time to develop to be able to manage those higher speeds. And again, very small 2 to 5% decreases in the overall average speed, so not even talking about kilometres here, can have a 20% impact on reducing crashes, the fatal and serious injuries in crashes. So just small shifts and nudges in behaviour can have huge outcomes.
I find it very interesting that you talk about driving as being a social activity, and I don't think many people think of it in that sense. But when you were talking about that sort of bullying behaviour earlier, what it made me think of is the way people behave on social media. That there is this distance. I mean, we're boxed off in our little cars. And so we do treat other human beings in a way that you wouldn't in a face-to-face way. So you do. A very obvious link, isn't there, between, say, the old smoking ads, which were all about often just being butch and being independent and being free and being out there. And that's exactly how cars are still marketed.
Yeah, can you believe it? I've only just come to Mad Men. It's on my Netflix at the moment.
Right, okay.
I'm gobsmacked that it's taken me my 30 years of life to get to this point. But I'm loving it because that is what my public health training and what I've seen in the published research, it's clear. It undermines our policy support. So people didn't used to support things like tobacco-free pubs and tobacco.
No.
Now we can't imagine that coming back into place. It would be absurd to suggest that. But we don't think like that for some things to do with changing speed limits to make them safer in local streets, for example. There is some good support out there for that in pockets of Western Australia. There is good support for some change to speed limits. And I think what's undermining it at the moment is that disinformation. So we need to get the facts out there. We need to get that the number one killer of children is our roads. And that the only way we fix this is through policy. We can't educate our way out of this. People have been educated on this galore. Mass media campaigns, on the cinema screens, in our social media feeds. That's all fine, but it's not working.
Well, let's talk a bit about some of those vulnerable road users. So in 2024, there were lots of motorcyclist fatalities on WA roads, while in 2025, we're seeing lots of pedestrians being killed. Our roads are used by many people of all ages and experiences, using different modes of transport. What are some of the risks that we're seeing affecting these particular groups, for example, pedestrians or e-ridable users or cyclists?
I would suggest that the pedestrian numbers most likely do include some of those e-ridables, which are, increasing in time, because they don't have a category in our road rules and in the way that we code when police are reporting crashes and other features. So a lot of local government design rules will count that there's vehicles on the road, but if there's vehicles that are legislated that they must be on the footpath, which applies to e-ridables on roads over 50k, for example, that they may well be getting counted as a pedestrian because they don't have a category. We're needing to shift the way that we categorise. Some time ago, we needed to shift the way we categorise vehicles. They were small, medium and large, and now we've got compact at one end and we have huge vehicles at the other end. So it's ever evolving, and I suspect that some of that pedestrian data, when we have access to unpack and really look at those figures, we'll get a better idea.
Tepi, what do you think about the specific risks faced by some of these vulnerable users?
Yeah. So people walking, if there's no footpath, it's inherently unsafe. And so I've been working with a fantastic researcher at University of Western Australia called Paula Hooper, who's got the Thriving Perth portal, she calls it. And it's big layers of all different types of maps. So she starts with the map of Perth and she layers on different things. One of them is a footpath layer to see where our footpaths are compared to our roads. Let's just say it's not good. Right. Let's just say that there's a lot of improvement that needs to be made to providing footpaths. It might just be on one side of the road. It's probably not enough. But often it's not even on any side of the road. And the speed limit's still 50 kilometres an hour.
Is that particularly in newer areas?
There's a mix, yeah. So
okay.
In the more established areas in the inner city, there tends to be one at least, and maybe two. And then on the outskirts, there tends to be one or none. So, yeah, these new developments, are meant to have one by the planning standards, so they should have one. But the problem is they're not accompanied by the shade. They're not accompanied by safe speed limits.
Right.
So they're trying to cross, and you asked me the question about people walking, dying. Providing footpaths seems like a pretty basic requirement to me to make it safe for people to walk on streets where the speed limit's greater than 30. Okay. So we can talk about changing the speed limit, so we can talk about adding footpaths in.
Yeah.
I know which one's cheaper, and I know which one's quicker and easier to do.
All right. But also with those footpaths, they need to be safe and comfortable spaces. So more canopy, more shade, more green.
And also not on the edge of the road.
Not on the very edge
there
of the road.
Seems to be this design, and maybe this is part of having more infill. So where we need to balance things out, where there's not a footpath and then the verge and then the road, but the footpaths are right on the edge of the road. So again, that is not an attractive environment and not somewhere where you would be encouraging children to walk to school without an adult present.
And that's the context of that work with Paula Hooper's work, was to look at safe routes to school. And we all want kids to have that independence, to be able to get to school on their own, especially as they're getting older. So good for us, But we looked at the footpaths, we looked at the shade coverage, and it's just not there for a lot of schools. So it feels a bit like victim blaming, asking parents to say, let your kids, you should be letting your kids walk and ride to school, when we don't even provide a footpath. We probably don't provide a pedestrian crossing across those more major roads, those arterial roads. We talked about Stirling Highway before. There's not many pedestrian crossings across there, zebra crossings, signalised crossings. And when they are there, the wait time at the push button can be minutes.
Yes.
As a pedestrian, as someone waiting to cross the road. So these are easy wins. That one in particular, adding more pedestrian crossings, and the ones we do have, making it easier, reducing the amount of time it takes to cross.
One other thing I wanted to talk about with these figures is that with these vulnerable users, we're seeing a rise in fatalities rather than just accidents more broadly. What role, and I think, Teresa, you touched on this, what role does vehicle choice play, particularly when we're thinking about these vulnerable road users? Are the cars we're choosing to drive making the roads more deadly?
Is it what we are choosing or what's coming into the market? And, with one of the main things that the federal government can do is approve which vehicles get to be sent to Australia. I mean, we're not manufacturing passenger vehicles now. But the size of these huge vehicles and the shifting to electric vehicles, which of course is great to have more electric vehicles from an environmental factor, but some of these monster trucks with beds of batteries are actually, the tonnage is beyond the barriers and the systems that we have in place, even for trucks. At lower speeds, they have capacity to go at much higher speeds and hit these barriers. And our basically our road network is not fit for purpose to be allowing some of these vehicles in the country. But that's a concerning trend. But it's part of Tepi mentions policy, but the way that road safety is governed is very fractured in Australia because of our federation, and also because we only have so many of federal roads, the major highway one, but main roads are doing fantastic work on the roads that they are responsible for, but really 80% of those crash statistics are happening on local government roads. Right. And we've been good at talking to the road authorities amongst ourselves, and we're only now really picking up. So some just last week with Main Roads and the WOLGA, Western Australia Local Government Association, running workshops for local governments to understand, when we talk about a safe system, what role the design of the roads and some of the measures that we've talked about, redesigning for community and connection, not just redoing, if there's potholes or a crash has happened at an intersection, not just fixing it back to what it was before, but really looking at redesigning intersections in particular. One of the areas where we still just can't and will never perhaps be able to design vehicles to protect occupants is inside impact crashes.
What's an inside impact crash?
So if you think of like a T-bone,
right,
that head-on, we've got a lot of safety features in the front and rear of vehicles now that can absorb that energy and stop people in the vehicle being injured. But if you are struck from the side and there's that intrusion into the cabin, that's where it's really hard to reduce injury. So roundabouts are fantastic for that because we've got to stop people swapping lanes when they are in a roundabout. But even then, when that crash occurs, it's side by side because of the way that they are hitting. And so if we can, stop having our 90-degree angle cross intersections that allow for those impacts on the side and think about redesigning ways to get around without allowing that type of crash scenario, that's another way that we can reduce the fatalities even for people within the vehicles.
Okay, I hadn't really thought about roundabouts as being a safety measure in that way, reducing the
they
T-bone
simplify
crashes.
the intersection also because you're mostly looking in one direction.
True.
I think the one thing that I've noticed in Perth, that part of roundabout rules is that it's not just giving way to right, it's also giving way to vehicles that are already in those roundabouts. And I've noticed in some areas you have very poor sight distance to vehicles speeding up a hill, coming into that roundabout and tooting at you when you're already in the roundabout and you haven't seen them. So do think about that as well. They're fantastic for simplifying traffic, but again, we need to follow the rules. But those types of impacts are less likely to be the fatal and serious injury ones.
Would like to see people learn how to indicate to come off a roundabout.
Yes.
Or I think that is something we could work on. I guess what we're talking about here is thinking about making the roads safer, obviously. Tepi, could you talk to us about the safe system approach to road safety, about the layers that are involved in road safety? And I feel you've touched on this, but if we could just talk about what this safe system is.
Safe system is about going beyond just one thing, going beyond education, going beyond licensing, and thinking about what is it that's actually underpinning this, what policies are underpinning this, the way we design our roads. So, and putting that all together. That's a nutshell, and Teresa will flesh it out because there's a lot more to it than that. But what I wanted to say on the safe systems approach specifically is that there are bigger levers to pull that are more effective. Mm-hmm. Okay, the levers that we pull currently around education and around licensing aren't the most effective levers, but we do them because they're politically easy. They're easy wins. But we actually have to do these harder ones, otherwise we will continue to see people dying on roads at the rate that they are, at the rate that it gobsmacks me, and it's heart-wrenching that it's still the number one killer of children. I know I've touched on that a few times here, but it's a statistic that sits with me because it shouldn't be the case in a country like Australia that we accept that cars, the way we design our roads, the policies that we have facilitate that the number one killer will be our roads of children.
I think it's that. I mean, yes, it's extraordinary that people accept that, and I wonder if it's because of that sense of this fatalistic approach that, well, of course that's going to happen. But if you put it in those terms, the trade-off for getting to work 5 minutes, 2 minutes earlier is that you're putting children's lives at risk. I mean, no one's going to sign up for that.
You also talked about accidents before. In the road safety world, we don't talk about accidents. When
as soon as I said that word, I said that's not the word we use anymore.
It is when we're talking public, that's a word that people understand. But when we look at crashes, we find that every crash is predictable and preventable. When we break it down, and yes, we hear often 90-something% of crashes have a human error. That does not mean the fatal 5 behaviours or intentionally doing something wrong. We as humans, we have vision. We have limits to our vision, our concentration, how many factors we can be focusing on at once. So if a road design is too complex, if we cannot see we can't see around corners, we blink when we sneeze, we can't change these things. But there are also things about our vision that we call inattentional blindness. If we are looking for the dominant traffic flow and looking at the vehicles coming through, we can be looking directly at a motorcyclist and not see them. And looking and seeing is very different. And it's motorcyclists are the other category that's increasing. And I've been quite shocked when I've done the calculations and put our statistics into percentages that the World Health Organization does a global status report on road safety periodically. Australia's current rate of fatalities for motorcyclists is exactly the world average. And we're talking about OECD countries where the dominant form of travel is motorcycling. It's appalling that Australia has that level. And when we think about how much focus has gone also into the car culture in protecting the driver, brought that down really quickly, then thought, well, we're not actually protecting passengers, got better at protecting occupants in vehicles, and we've focused on pedestrians and cyclists more. But I feel that the motorcyclists has been left out a little bit, not fitting clearly in one or the other areas. And the global shift as we become for more active futures and more livable cities is that we do need to prepare for more motorcyclists as well. Electronic motorcycling is huge. So the huge European Union and the US modelling says we all need to prepare for more of these individual motorised traffic. I think the other thing to point out that, yes, we're more vulnerable to injury for a pedestrian or a cyclist or an e-rideable user or a motorcyclist. There's been huge world studies done, including work led by Australian Professor Mark Stevenson, that yes, at the moment, if everyone shifted in Australia, we would have a deficit. There'd be more people getting injured because they're more vulnerable. But cities like Tepi mentioned, there's cities in Europe in particular that have already got this better infrastructure and better design, that is not the case. They are bringing road deaths down. And so Australia has really fallen behind global trends. When I started in road safety, we got into the top 10 performers of OECD countries in around 2002. 20 years later, in 2022, we're barely in the top 20 and we're below the median. So this is not because we're asking to do things that aren't happening around the world. Australia's really fallen behind. We've really dropped the ball and we need to get better.
Well, are we getting worse or are we just not keeping up?
Both.
Both. Okay.
I might just jump in with one very quick thing.
Yeah.
So the banned word don't talk about accidents. I think it's the way we talk about this is really important. When we say accident, we're implying that it's inevitable. Mm-hmm. When we say crash, we're implying it's preventable. And that's the case. It is preventable. There's another word that's on my list.
Your banned list?
Yeah, it's probably like the public health world coming out here. And we've used it a few times, and we use it all the time. Is culture. Culture is driven by policy, not the other way around. Okay? So we've got to flesh that out a little bit. So the policies that we have in place shape our behaviour. And so they think, West Australia's got a really poor culture of speeding. Or do we just have a really bad design of the roads, like Teresa was touching on with certain roads? Do we have a really bad speed limit, and it means that people are willing to speed on a street that's clearly not designed for it? They're the policies that we've got to change to influence the culture. So that'll be the last time I use that word.
Okay.
We've got a whole list because I think the framing is so important. If we want to get people's support, if you're thinking and watching this podcast and in support of some of the things that Teresa and I have been talking about, the language we use is so important. It builds a narrative and builds public support for this work.
So essentially, you're saying that WA drivers aren't bad drivers; they're just guided by bad policy.
Yeah. In a nutshell, I think that's absolutely it.
Right.
So there's nothing inherently bad about West Australians. That's why.
Okay. So we don't need to fix WA drivers. We just need to fix the policy.
Absolutely. Yeah. This is the nutshell. When people say, Melbourne people are bad, I'm like, well, what drives that? Because it's like the people in Helsinki, are they angels because they achieved 0 road deaths this year? Are they somehow god tier people? No, no. I've met people from Helsinki. They do some awful, weird things, as well. But they're lovely people. But that's really important.
And to finish where I was going, when we say 90% involve a human factor, there's been fantastic research done by colleagues in New Zealand. And they show that and also going back to what are the elements of the safe system. Safe road users are one area, the people. Safe roads and roadsides, safe speeds, safe vehicles, safe policies and governance. This makes up the system. And they looked at, again, did a random selection of crashes, went through all the details. Yes, the most common factor was the human factor, but also there were road factors, there were design factors, there were the speed factors, there were policies. And when they categorised them all according to this safe system model, they were able to show quite clearly that the number of those system elements, as that increased, the number of elements involved in the crash, the more likely they were to be fatal. So it's not just a theoretical model. They've been able to show that it really does matter. And again, we are human, and it's not just about poor decisions that we're deciding that we're going to speed or we're going to drive even though we're tired. Some things like speed and fatigue, they can come on while you're driving. You can't plan ahead for that. Not wearing a seatbelt, or and often drink driving, or if you know you're going to be out and you're going to be drinking, then driving isn't that. You can plan ahead for that not to be your option.
If the policy's in place that there's Ubers available and taxis available, that helps offset that need to make a personal decision to not drink and drive. So you need that in place, right? You need the policy in place that, we have a phone number for a taxi at the side of the bar. Yes, we can even call you one. Mm-hmm. If you have all of those things, you're making it easier and easier and more convenient for people to do the right thing. And I think this is what it comes down to. The policy drives convenience. And the current policy drives it makes it convenient to drive for most things. And what we need to do is shift that policies. And that's what they've done in countries around the world and cities around the world that have achieved 0 deaths or achieved low deaths. They haven't just told people be better, drive better, be safe. They have tackled that full wheel, but particularly focused on the policies, particularly.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about can we ever get to zero road deaths? Tepi, you're saying it's absolutely possible.
Absolutely possible. The biggest lever we pull is the housing, because that will reduce the total number of kilometres we need to drive. That just means less time stuck in congestion, less time on the road. Nobody really wants to be sat there. We want shorter commutes. We want things close by. We want to get to the shops easy, all that sort of stuff. So that's the biggest lever. And it's probably the least obvious. When we're talking about road safety, people obviously think, oh, well, the roads or the speed limits or driver education or whatever it is. But actually, it's the way we design the urban environment. So we think about Helsinki. It's not this like mecca of high-density places like, say, Hong Kong or something like that. But what they have done is they have got 3 to 4 story houses instead of just 1 story houses in their inner urban environments. So it means that people have got access to public transport services because they're viable, because there's more people around and there's things to walk to. There's a coffee shop at the end of the street. There's a barber shop round the corner. There's a critical mass of people living in an area to support services. And when we keep stretching out 170 kilometres across the coastline, it costs taxpayers more and more money to put the services out there. And essentially you just end up with some areas that maybe have a school and a shopping centre 10 kilometres away. And the only possible way to get there is to drive. Sure. And that driving in and of itself isn't bad. But the more kilometres we have to do, the more exposure we have to a crash.
Just thinking about infrastructure briefly there, one thing we haven't really touched on is the fact that metro fatalities were up on regional fatalities, and that's quite unusual. Is it because what we've been discussing here, the way the city has been stretched out 170 kilometres, is it because people are just having to make those longer drives? Does that alone explain the upswing in metro fatalities, do you think?
Yeah, so the couple that might have been able to buy a house in a Belmont or a Ascot area of years gone by and have access to the city within 15, 20-minute drive can now afford that same place 45 minutes away, 50 minutes away by drive. And there may be a train there, but you probably have to drive to the train and it's slower, so you probably drive the whole thing. That's just increasing the number of kilometres we have to drive.
Teresa, what do you think? Can WA ever get to zero road deaths?
I'm a strong believer. I hope it happens in my lifetime. With the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, the world has signed up to this. So our targets right now are to halve the deaths and serious injuries at least by 2030. And this is where this reverse trend at the moment is really going the wrong way. But to eliminate by 2050. And when we talk about that, it doesn't mean that crashes won't be happening, but we shouldn't be dying or being injured for life just going about our business every day. We don't accept it in any other form of transport, rail, air, shipping. Why is it that we accept that, that there are accidents happen on the road? It's when we think about it from that perspective, why has that? Why have we? I can't say culture, right, Tepi? But why is that? And there's some really important things when you ask people, well, what should that number be? I feel like we had some of those conversations during COVID. I know people hate me to bring this up, but we're trying to push it out of our mind. But it happened, right, when we were locked down and not having anywhere near the types of fatalities that other countries had. But we made the economic decision eventually with a lot of pressure that, okay, we need to open back up and go back. On the road deaths cost us a lot of money. The modelling shows actually that, we're in the high 20s of $1 billion is put just to road deaths and
you can combine that 20 billion with the subsidies that we put into road building, which is 8 billion. So we're at 28 billion. Then we look at air pollution. Then we look at I think you start to add all of those things up and go, is it becoming too expensive to keep doing things the way we are doing it? That's one. The economic case is enormous to change this. But at the macro level for the government and the taxpayer, 20 billion. I mean, I didn't know that. That's an incredible number. And the 8 billion in subsidies, it's there in black and white in government report. It's not hidden away somewhere that some crazy researchers like ourselves have come up with. It's there. And
if you look at the percentage of GDP that we spend on improvements versus for safety versus for progress, we have a fraction of percentage that other states, other world-leading countries in road safety spend a lot more on trying to improve safety on the roads.
And I think what they're achieving at the same time is, look, we're talking about road safety in this conversation, of course, but they're also achieving independence for children. They're achieving, like my grandma being able to cross the road. They're achieving lower air pollution, climate action. They're doing all of this stuff, giving access to sports fields. You don't have to get your parent to drop you off and take them away out of the workforce. There's all sorts of economic benefits from this. One that we haven't talked about, but this is another policy that exists in Australia, is the subsidies to actually purchase those big cars that we were talking about before. And those subsidies stack that on top of the cost to the taxpayer. And wow, we're not only paying for what we think we're paying for roads, which is already expensive, registration, insurance, all the rest of it. We're paying for all of these things through our taxes, and non-drivers are paying for them.
And I think, and that's what I was saying before about it being fractured. So we might, if the budget all has to come from the transport sector to improve road safety, the federal government is there with, it's a disconnect with these vehicles coming in, the truckzillas, right? So it's a disconnect with what's happening at local government that's happening at the state and territory level. So the money that needs to go in has benefits across sectors, policing, getting to, if you bring in the court system and the magistrates and people defending fines, or as well as just the general costs of when they have killed and injured people and what comes through. That's a massive budget as well. But there's a lot of pressure on just transport parts of government to try and fix this problem. But I think this conversation is making it quite clear. It's very intersectoral. So there's health, there's justice, there's
the planning bit, the housing bit,
I think that we need to get people working together, and I think that these targets that the world is putting to eliminate deaths and serious injuries as a daily part of our lives is really driving that we will see them working more together.
Okay. I mean, as we can see, it's a complex issue. We need different sectors working together. Let's try to simplify it in closing. So going back to where we started, there were 188 fatalities on WA roads last year. It's a terrible trend that seems to be getting worse this year. What's one thing each of you would do tomorrow to try to reverse that trend? Tepi?
Absolutely change the speed limit to make it safer. Instant benefits, low cost, just take strong, bold political action, and we will see a reduction in the amount of people dying on our roads.
Fantastic. Teresa?
That was going to be my answer. This representative survey that we have conducted for the Road Safety Commission shows there is, right now, the public would be quite happy. You would have very few, except the squeaky wheels that we hear about so often in the media, if we could drop those rural defaults immediately. So those higher speeds, less congestion is why they're so much likely to be fatal or lifelong serious injuries. We could, when the speed limits change to be metric from the miles per hour, most of the states, the conversion was 104 kilometres an hour from the 60 miles. Now the states have put that in as 100 kilometres, rounding down. WA rounded up and had 110. That one, again, policy decision one decision from a few decades ago has cost hundreds of lives and thousands, tens of thousands of serious injuries just from that one decision. And to just do that now, just to be aligned with the rest of the country, would immediately have a change without very, very low cost at all. And Tasmania has brought in a separate default for the unsealed and gravel roads. Now, in WA, that's over 100,000 kilometres. We have a huge network. It's just not feasible to expect even main roads to be able to get to all those roads and survey them, get the treatments right, put the posted speed limits on. Mm-hmm. Those defaults, again, we're not changing the motorway speeds or any of the roads where the signs are up already. If you could immediately put those down to 80, there's good community acceptance for that. But also, hardly anyone is doing over 80 Ks on those roads. They're not great roads. And I think we can learn from the Northern Territory experience when I was working with them some time ago when they were introducing 130 kilometres. It's the highest in the country from having open roads. And there was huge outcry. And people saying, the trucks, you'll stop the economy. And actually the Trucking Association got up and said, no, we support this. We can't do those types of speeds and it makes people erratic around us. So I would say it might seem brave, but I have representative data to say that there's hardly anyone doing these types of speeds. So even if they support that they don't want things to change, there's a lot of confusion about what the defaults are in the rural and the gravel road areas, and it does make a difference. Now, yes, the swing in the percentage increase has gone up in metro areas, but that part of the problem is still a smaller proportion compared to the rural areas. And that's why just a few extra numbers can make it look like a swing like 63%. We still don't want that. That's got to go down. And not everything is explained by population increase. Unfortunately, in our survey, there wasn't the support to bring down the urban defaults. But I think if you give people compelling information and they understand this more and do the speed measurement, hardly anyone's able to go to really high speeds in the congestion of the city. Again, our streets are full. Let's have nicer, livable neighbourhoods and leave the higher speeds for those connector roads. And I don't think that people are going to be losing anything. It is an illusion, and we need to bring the community on board with that.
And it will be, as Tepi said, when they ban smoking in pubs and restaurants. There's no way we'd go back to that now. But just
can I say, when the alcohol limits came on board, this was back in the days of the 70s and the dinner parties and the adults drinking their bottles of wine with dinner. It wasn't just seen as a young person or a particular rural community where there was no transport. It was generally accepted, and people would say, oh, well, yeah, maybe you feel a little bit more relaxed. But we're vigilant and we look at what we're doing and we don't think it's a problem. It was actually the big visible programs and the drastic results that came in once the BAC limits were put in and they were enforced, that community sentiment changed. And now there's very, very strong support. People accept that, having too many drinks and puts you over. Most motorcyclists that I know don't drink at all because they know, and we know that even at 0.02, you have impacts in your vision and your mental processing and other things. And it's actually the same with speeding. So if we can be brave and do that and just show that we are saving lives and it is having a benefit, maybe that can be, maybe people aren't on board yet, but if we can show the benefits that it brings, maybe I would like to think in the future it'll be the same with drink driving, that, people there's strong acceptance that drink driving matters and strong acceptance that seatbelts protect and that fatigue and driving don't mix. Why not speed?
So change is possible. We can reverse this trend. Teresa, Tepi, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in. If you liked this episode, let us know and share it with a friend. Don't forget to hit subscribe, and we'll catch you in the next episode of RAC's Horizons podcast.